Welcome everyone to Plug and Pay. This is a talk show where we talk with inspiring payroll professionals from all around the world about interesting, thought-provoking topics that are shaping today's global payroll industry. My name is Marc Oliver Fiedler. I'm the founder and CEO of Payzar, and I'm also the host of the show. Together with our head of service delivery, Max van der Klis-Busink. Max, how are you doing today?
Great, Mark, especially since you pronounced my last name flawlessly. Thank you.
Today I managed to, yeah. I'm proud of myself.
Very excited to be back on a new episode of Plug and Pay, Mark.
Fantastic. So I think we have a special one today. We have a great guest. With us today is Sylwia Korhonen, Senior Payroll Transformation Manager at Fresenius Medical Care. Sylwia, it's great to have you on Plug and Pay. Thank you so much for joining us. So to get us started, we always like to find out a little bit about the background of our guests. And maybe if you just want to tell us about yourself and how you ended up in payroll.
Sure. Marc, Max, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And Marc, kudos to correct pronunciation on the surname as well. So it's nice of day. Love it.
Two for two.
Absolutely. So my background in payroll actually started from a background in HR. I used to process local HR documents, and I worked for HR administration. And then having that, if you will, sideline exposure to my teammates who worked in payroll, seeing that complexity of stakeholders, seeing the system, seeing the kind of accountability and overall, I'd say complexity is something that really kind of pulled me in. So I have then transitioned into payroll operations, but with a heavy focus on global payroll projects and various system implementations. So I'd say there's been a few good operational years and then a full transition into transformation, which is now my current focus. So maybe just to define a little bit my current job, it is around defining and driving governance, strategy, quality, process improvement, overall looking at systems, people, processes, how are they harmonized, what is the optimal end state, and defining that value going forward.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like it's a very interesting role, and given your background, I think you've obviously built up a lot of experience to come at this new role that you're taking on with a very interesting perspective to drive that kind of transformation. And that leads us also into kind of the topic area that we want to talk about today. The focus for today's conversation is something that I think we all talk a fair amount about. And I know, Sylwia, you've been quite active on social media as well to talk about payroll branding. And what we mean by that is how payroll really positions itself within the broader organization and how it is able to communicate and deliver value to the various different stakeholders that exist within, but also outside of the payroll organization. So I guess where I would like to start talking about payroll branding is just your thoughts on what is payroll's promise of delivery. What is payroll? Who are we as a payroll team, as a payroll organization, and what is really the value that payroll is intended to bring to the organization?
So I think traditionally payroll is seen as back-end office, very heavily focused on operations. It's execution based. I think it would be also fair to say that it's seen as reactive in its form. There's a lot of heavy regulated controls. There's a lot of heavy regulated procedures. And I'd say that the perception of payroll is that we have hard deliverables, we have ongoing cycles. And I think the brand that we have across the years created for ourselves is accurate and timely delivery of payments to the employees. So I'd always label us as dependable and focused on delivering best employee experience, always on time, every time, right?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate description. If you can't deliver payroll on time and be accurate, I think that's probably the most fundamental things that people are expecting to see out of the payroll organization is People want to get paid, right? And they want to make sure that they get paid what they're supposed to get paid, right, at the end of the month or at the end of the pay cycle.
Absolutely. And I think, so that is, it's let's say the initial layer. And I think when we peel back that layer, there's a lot more to payroll. I rarely see payroll being spoken of as, kind of translating into mitigation of errors for cost savings, potentially, or again, driving system implementations to create time efficiencies and cost savings. There should be a lot more focus on showcasing our preventative measures. We follow local regulations, again, and we have strict controls to ensure that there's not going to be any penalties. Yeah. So this is maybe something that is for us a given because it's a standard, because this is something that we followed across the years. But I think we need to showcase that it is up to us to ensure penalties, are not happening. I think another piece would be increasing security. So, for instance, we have the way how we translate information or move information across systems. Do we have secure file protocols? Yeah, and we mitigate risk through implementing those controls to ensure that we don't have errors in data handling. So again, communicating, this is the way how we handle information, this is how we mitigate risk, and in this way, we contribute to ensuring that additional costs don't occur to the organization. What do you think?
I think it's great, Sylwia. It brings back the days, which was not so long ago, where I was in a similar shoes. But you said when we peel it down, it made me think of a movie called Shrek. Because there is this scene in the movie Shrek where the donkey says to Shrek, onions have layers. So Shrek also has a lot of layers. Maybe global payroll is a bit like Shrek, and we should be promoting ourselves to get out there and make a change. Because if you remember, anybody who has seen Shrek will remember. If not, I encourage you to look at Shrek and look at it through the lens of a global payroll professional. He needs to get out of the swamp. He needs to be comfortable being himself. He needs to be able to go to that Lord Farquaad in his big castle and tell them what's all about. And maybe then when he sees the Queen Fiona, who might be our HR friends or our other stakeholders, and let her see our true selves. And maybe then they will also reveal themselves, because in the end, Fiona is also kind of a Shrek. So what I'm trying to say here is we should probably move away from the table stakes, because everybody expects us to pay, right? Accurately, timely, every time. We've done that for hundreds of years, maybe even. So what do we tell others, like our stakeholders, whoever they are? What do we actually bring in terms of value to make them successful? And how do we change the perception of payroll from being a, as you mentioned, a back office, heads down type of function who rarely says, yeah, sure, we can do it. We have all the time in the world. Compared to saying, no, we need to firefight, we need to get payroll out the door, we don't have time, we really don't want to challenge the status quo. You being a transformation manager, Sylwia, how would you transform that Shrek from the swamp to Shrek being a replacement of Lord Farquaad and marrying with Fiona in the castle?
Yeah. So I would say the starting point would be developing a strategy and understanding what is the end state. I'd look at 3-5 years down the line. Yeah. What are our priorities? And it wouldn't be a system that is a priority. It would be more around kind of qualities that we consider as valuable. Let's say we're looking at business continuity through having key person dependencies removed, or with centralized knowledge bases to support this. We're simplifying processes so that we don't have, let's say, language dependencies amongst people. So I think having those targets and assigned kind of year by year roadmap steps to get to them is absolutely critical. So having that vision in place, but also having like a layout of how it's going to be approached and what is done is important. But our vision, it's just, if you will, for payroll, we need to socialize it with finance, with HR. We need to understand what is critical for them. And what I like to do, and I sometimes receive this question, is how do we understand what is of value to finance? How do we understand what is of value to HR? And I think the simplest starting point is, what are our payroll outputs? So right now, what reports, for example, are we delivering to finance? Yeah. So, and what does it contribute to? So what do they need from us? How can we provide it? How do we measure our accuracy to support them? And what are the conversations that we're having with them? But I think we have to be incredibly mindful of who are our stakeholders and who are our clients, and also understanding what are their profiles. We would not communicate to finance and HR in a similar way that we are communicating to employees. There might be channels that are more appropriate. For instance, when we're going live with projects, I often see posters in the office to attract attention, or I may see webinars or town halls, for instance, held, to kind of energize everyone. But perhaps there may be more technical teams that would benefit more from knowledge repositories. So we have to, or I recommend to map, who are our stakeholders, what is the information that is valuable to them, and how do we communicate to them so that it's accessible. Clearly, someone working in retail business probably won't have access to a laptop. So maybe it's not appropriate to be sending emails.
So talking about those stakeholders, I mean, the obvious ones are finance and HR, I suppose, which we all know about, and there's interactions and dependencies on a daily basis, right? Working with those stakeholders. So if we think about those stakeholders and how to make them more successful in their roles that they're playing for the organization, in your experience, are there certain things that payroll professionals could or should be doing to understand what are the key success criteria for someone working, let's start with finance, right? Yeah. And where payroll has the answers or has some, value add contributions that they can deliver to someone working in finance. What would be some examples of the key things that you would expect a finance person is looking for, striving for, that payroll maybe unknowingly has, at their fingertips. And if they only knew, hey, this is how finance could be, we could make finance lives this much better, they could actually start playing a much more strategic partnership role with finance.
So I think there's a lot of initiatives. For instance, if there's country migrations that are a catalyst for change. And I think at those moments, it's the best time to initially engage the relevant stakeholders and to map them out, and then to build that partnership across the years. It is, from my experience, I believe bodies, if you will, such as Total Rewards, finance, they are heavily data-driven. And I think the question is, since payroll sits on all of the data in the organization to a significantly higher extent than HR, how can we provide in an automated way data that is relevant to the teams? What are the reports? What needs to be showcased in what specific manner, in such a way so that, again, there doesn't have to be manual manipulation by the finance team, there doesn't have to be handover, and so that it's streamlined and automated. For instance,
it's an interesting analogy, because if you take it literally, we sit on a vast amount of data. Maybe it's time we stop sitting on it and we actually start using it and translating it into the different stakeholder needs. Because always when I hear finance, HR, I think as those functions have diversified and have grown, right? If you would just say finance, you actually mean accounting, financial planning and analysis. Sometimes you have audit, you have external financial reporting, you would have treasury. If you would kind of break it down into the different functions within a department, they would have distinct different needs, but you could all link them back to payroll, right? Accounting, the clear one, they need very timely, accurate journal entries. But FP&A, they would love to get the data that we're currently sitting on, probably not down to the employee level because you would want some security around it. But what if you could enable FP&A to report on, roughly 60 to 75% of the total cost of a company, labor costs, and you could help them understand what those, what that data actually means and how they can then go to the business to say, hey, this is what we see happening in terms of location strategy. If you indeed work in a retail company, like you mentioned, you could say, labor arbitrage or the number of overtime hours in a certain location. They could be using our data. So what advice would you have for someone starting in that transformation journey, like yourself, going to the stakeholders and then making sure they make an impact to the stakeholders? What steps do they need to take to do that, Sylwia?
So I also recommend kind of benchmarking ourselves against what are the upcoming laws and legislation, what is, if you will, trendy, because that is often what is heard. Gender pay gap is a big topic, diversity and inclusion. It's much easier to pitch items that are popular in media and to make it relevant to the appropriate parties. So I think ensuring, for instance, that now, since there's going to be pay transparency laws in place, we need to have data and reporting that is going to support it, and understanding which stakeholders should hold relevant data and what kind of analysis is needed. So I think, again, looking a little bit externally before pulling it in internally, and then matching it with internal needs to create that business case.
And just from a practical perspective, in both of your experiences, because you both worked at large multinational organizations, just kind of getting that dialogue started between payroll thought leaders in the organization and people responsible for finance or HR roles. And as Max pointed out, it's not just one homogenous finance organization. There's lots of sub disciplines within that, same in HR, right? How do you go about that? Starting those conversations. I mean, I'm as I'm listening to both of you, I'm sort of picturing, well, wouldn't it be great if we could just do like a half-day workshop and just sit together virtually or in a room and start sketching out things on the whiteboard, or what are some of the things that finance would really love to get their hands on, and then bounce that off of the rest of the room and see how we can respond to that. Are those kind of sessions realistically happening, or is payroll considered to be so far off from being engaged in these more future strategic thinking types of activities that you're not even being viewed as a partner in those discussions?
Yeah. So I think again, being very conscious of creating those channels, ensuring that we have bi-weekly, let's say, meetings with our closest partners, whether it's finance, whether it's HR, or monthly calls on a more strategic level, it's very critical. I'd say the way how I like to, if you will, label it as creating intake channels, idea intake channels. I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities that are seen even across, let's say, HR operations, our specialists, our employees. There has to be portals, platforms, review procedures of where we allow ideas to be heard and socialized with us. And this should be communicated, this should be available. So while we have, if you will, formal meetings, workshops, gatherings to discuss high-level items, we also should have that additional line of communication to allow idea intake from the business.
Yeah. No,
thanks. So yeah, I think that resonates. If I think back at the days where we also used to plot this, I think the seat at the table discussion is something I like and dislike, because I think we're talking about the round table. To Marc's point and to your point, Sylwia, we need to find a lot of tables where we need to either in person sit at or virtually, which could be with finance or HR. And there's kind of two ways of doing it. If I think of people that I've spoken to in the network, some first want to really get their house in order, like get that end state, get to a certain level where they're comfortable going out to stakeholders and engaging with them. There's another school of thought, which is more in line with what I am. I'm perfectly fine not being in order or 100% accurate because I know nobody is. So you might want to go based actually on an issue or something that's happening and create a collective sense of urgency on a topic, collaborate with those people, help solve a problem, and then start building a relationship. And, I once worked at a retail company where everybody was complaining. like everybody was complaining about payroll. Pay wasn't on a roll. It wasn't rolling. It wasn't paying. It was basically, it wasn't a great show. So instead of, going out there and fixing everything, I first just asked the business leaders, what would you want? What would you need? Regardless if I could deliver it, what's kind of your North Star, your utopia? Let's see if we get very close to utopia, similar to the employee. So what I would always say is, don't just try to think about what others would want, because you would be surprised if you would actually go out there asking them what they would want and then delivering on that promise, and then you will have a seat at the table. So my encouragement is always to go out there, regardless of your current as-is state, because a mutual problem is also a mutual solution, which can then turn into a partnership.
Absolutely. And like you said, I often hear this, we're stronger together. It is true. We build stronger business cases once we have the same vision, once we are aligned. Payroll does not exist in a siloed environment. In the end, we have, inputs, outputs, we have our partners, and creating that streamlined approach of what is that vision is very important. I'd even dare to say that otherwise, if we don't do this, we're going to bump into critical priorities. Are we trying to request budget for something for the same kind of money that may be allocated to finance? Yeah. So we may be competing for resources. We may be competing not only for financial resources, but for people resources. And we may be creating dependencies that are, impossible to solve. So I definitely think that harmonized view is, number one, but we need to know where we're headed to also be able to communicate that across. And I think there's a bit of a trick to it too, because labeling is fairly underused. I often see initiatives and someone will explain an initiative and say, we're right now standardizing and harmonizing all the documents and procedures for country X, Y, and Z. Well, that's fantastic. No one's going to remember this. We should have a label for it. It's a huge initiative, let's say, that will last for 6 months. Let's call it, I don't know, some kind of action word of, drive or lighthouse or something. Creating a formal program, formal approach. It elevates the effort. Absolutely. It elevates the effort, and it's even easier than to, have it kind of referred to across and to showcase it as a product.
So that sounds like what you're advocating is that the payroll almost needs like a PR function, right?
Absolutely.
To kind of articulate all the good things that payroll is already doing, and all the things that payroll still has the opportunity to contribute to and help doing. We have a joint responsibility to figure out how to articulate these things in a more effective manner. So a lot of good things, as we all know, are happening on a daily basis. But if they're not presented in the right light, they might either not get recognized at all, or they might be taken for granted. I think, when you started talking about earlier about, payroll mitigating the risk of penalties and, extra cost for getting people paid properly, right? And the efficiencies that are being generated. There's always a risk, because payroll, as you mentioned, is perceived as a, sort of transactional back office function. There's always the risk of people just taking it for granted, right? And not seeing the complexity and, all the big efforts that go into just making sure people are paid, hopefully on time, and the company's not, getting themselves into trouble. And so articulating that in a positive manner, not in a sort of, negative, well, we're just, we're just doing our job, but in a positive manner to articulate what's the real, value that's being created here, I think is not trivial, but I think there's huge value in doing that.
I think it's kind of storytelling, Mark, on what you're saying, right? Storytelling from payroll. I don't know, you probably did this as well without labeling it in your words as storytelling, but once to get a business case, I once said, what if we don't? Like, what if we don't work these hours? What if we don't do these controls? What if we don't? And then what if we had to build a business case? We could, support exponential growth. We could scale and shrink with the business. We could provide you with labor insights that if only it would save 1% of labor costs totally, it equates to this number. And then just leave it out there, because what you mentioned, Sylwia, about HR and finance, they will have a lot of initiatives as well, right? One way for people who need budget is to hop on board someone else's train. So sometimes payroll tries to find their own budget, right, to do a lot of stuff and do a lot of transformations. But as we know, we're like the aorta between a lot of functions. So whatever we would do, other functions will benefit from it. So if they're having transformation initiatives, most likely you could tap into those and build a business case saying, hey, if we would do this, it would actually mean this result for you. So why don't we make it a combined business case? So I don't know, Marc, if this is the direction you wanted to head at, but Sylwia, have you ever gotten those business cases together with HR or finance, or in your experience, have you done that like solely within the global payroll scope?
I've always done it together, and it makes an incredible difference of having a joint approach. This is why I also often see transformation teams either working together or being under the same pillar to support this drive. Again, there are knock-on effects of new processes, new systems, and if there's large initiatives, often payroll resources are, involved at least in the capacity of subject matter experts. So I think anything that is being done externally from payroll has to be at least made visible to payroll, and those efforts have to be accounted for operational stability and ensuring that we keep the lights on. But one thing, and I think this is a question for me to both of you, how often do you see a payroll newsletter in the company? How often have you seen these are the initiatives that we're driving? Currently, we're looking at Q1. Let's say these are the process improvements or end-to-end mappings that we're doing. These are the system changes that we've done. Here are the change requests. This is what we've done. This is where we're headed. I think we don't really highlight our efforts enough, and we don't make it visible. And I think to the very minimum, we should make it visible within a shared service environment or within our closest partners, such as HR and finance, to get them, again, involved, on board, to have end-to-end processes that are more efficient.
I think it's almost a rhetorical question, because you've answered it, but maybe before I pass on to you, Marc, my experience, so I think in general, yes, Sylwia, I think you're right, this is not done often enough. But we should also not forget that storytelling and getting out there is a certain skill, and not everyone within payroll is comfortable going out there doing that. So I think we, as leaders or managers, need to, identify the talents who are up for that and to help and coach them develop in those areas. But let's assume they are up for that. That in my experience, there were 2 occasions where we did do that. I reported into finance or accounting once where there were quarterly business reviews. And we were invited to give an update about payroll, like your 6 minutes of fame, right? So you need to make sure that what you're saying in those 6 minutes in front of the chief accounting officer, the chief financial officer, the chief, to make sure it resonates. And in order to do that, you need to try to step away from, hey, this is what I've done, but you should try to think of, hey, this is what they would want to hear. And how can I link that back to what I've done? I think sometimes that's the most difficult thing, because you're so excited about everything you've achieved, you've done, but maybe in the perception of others, it means nothing. So you need to kind of overcome that and say, hey, what can I say in those 6 minutes that resonate? And I had to do that. My proof point was I got a question from the CFO. So that means that actually she listened and had a detailed question about it, which was great. And in terms of the newsletters, we also created those before. I think those might have been too much inward, but it does create kind of a sense of cohesiveness within the global payroll team. Because, like in your organization, you have a very big scope, broad teams sitting everywhere. Sometimes someone sitting in Brazil doesn't really know about the initiative that's being done in Singapore. And I think within the global payroll team, it also makes a lot of sense to have those newsletters or whatever forum get together to make sure that you become one team. So that would be my 2, or probably it was 100 cents, sorry, on it. But Mark, passing on to you.
No, I think having a newsletter, whether it's a separate newsletter for just payroll, or again, let's create something bigger and join forces and create updates that cover finance and HR and payroll together. Because if we truly believe that we're supporting each other and together we're stronger, then that should also be reflected in the communication, right? And it shouldn't be payroll communicates about this and HR communicates about that and finance communicates about something else. It should be all communicating about similar things, right? And similar aspirations and initiatives together. But payroll then should, step up to have a distinct part in that, right? So it's not just finance or just HR, but payroll has its own platform in that. So I do think that's can work very effectively. I also would echo what Max is saying about the skill set required. I think there are some parts of the organization that are very naturally comfortable talking about themselves, about achievements, and if you're working in marketing or communication or sales, you're used to doing that all day long, right? Because that's your job. In payroll, that's not really part. Well, most people's job description probably won't say, "Hey, are you able to communicate in a very effective manner to a large organization, about your achievements." So I think recognizing that and then pushing ourselves extra hard, that while that might not be sort of the normal comfort place that we're used to, working with, we need to, right? We need to push ourselves out of that comfort zone. Back to Max's point of, sitting is a very passive thing to do. We need to be active. We need to jump up, right? And say, here we are, and we have great things to represent, and being proud about it and being bold about it as well. I think is important from a mindset perspective. So those would be my thoughts in terms of, how do we practically get from where we are today, where we're not communicating enough, and we're not labeling ourselves and branding ourselves enough. How can we get there?
I think Sylwia's turned into a host now, Mark. So Sylwia, what's up next? Lead the way.
Lord. Yeah, but maybe just to touch one more piece on this, just as you say, payroll professionals are not probably, recruited to be marketing teams. However, I think we need to create that support structure for them to kind of almost like a soundboard to help them retranslate their success into measurable targets. So sometimes they see great ideas, projects. Someone will approach me and say, "Hey, Sylwia, let's change wage type X, Y, and Z because it's going to be, I don't know, more efficient, and the calculation is going to be whatnot." Having that translated into, we're going to save 2 days within a month of processing time because it impacts 600 employees. Yeah. I think that's the shift, and that's the mindset that we need to develop within our teams to be able to communicate again. If there's any cost savings, what are the cost savings? What are the time savings? What are the efficiencies? We have incredible metrics. And I think, again, having even the payroll team sit down, assess KPIs with teams, for instance, transformation teams, to, again, understand where's that improvement? What does it mean for the business? And when we have those 6 minutes with the CFO, we're able then to, truly communicate, not in operational terms, but in, let's say, relevant terms, corporate terms. Yeah. What's the impact?
Yeah, I think it goes back to communication 101, right? You need to understand your audience.
Yeah.
And you need to, as you're trying to think about how do I want to present this topic, initiative, whatever it is, right? You need to really put yourself in their shoes, right? What do they care about? What motivates them? And translate everything that you're trying to say from your own words, because you might have your own way of thinking about what you've achieved into their words, right?
Yeah.
So that it resonates with them. I think that's the critical
There,
part of that labeling and branding component is not doing it from your own vantage point, but doing it from the people that you're trying to get excited and that you're trying to connect with.
yeah. There's also, of course, and then the concept of having focus groups. So having, appointed members who are especially dedicated to take part in initiatives. And I think that helps so much to unify HR, finance, payroll, as an example, and to have ongoing communication, but also on a global level. Yeah. So to communicate with regions and to see what is the idea intake, how easily adopted it would be, and whether it can be, it's almost like a trial for a small group and to bounce ideas. So I think focus groups are also key.
Sylwia, I know a few people in the network who are like down doing the payroll work, and they might also listen to this podcast while they're crunching numbers, and they might think, I would love to do this. I would love to get out there, but I simply don't have the time because payroll is consuming my day and night. What would you recommend to them, saying, hey, what change would they have to make to be able to get out there and do the storytelling?
So I think the first recommendation would be to the managers to enable the teams. The way to, again, enable the teams, there's no better way than having a label, having a dedicated, let's say, super user, subject matter expert, however you want to call it, and create a dedicated recurring call that is acknowledged and that is part of that timeline within a month, so that we agree 4 hours per month. Yeah, this person is unavailable. If that's not going to be acknowledged, it's not going to be sustained. It's so simple. So I think having formal channels supported by managers and leadership is important. But I think when it comes to having that drive and having the initiatives, I'd always say that those who process, they have the most hands-on experience, they have the best ideas, they know what is needed. The knowledge is already with them. They don't need external teams telling them how to adjust payroll necessarily. So I think it's, again, just bringing them out to be able to, showcase that and drive it. So it's just to create that opportunity. And I'd say if there's at any point that anyone wants to get involved, reach out to, your manager, reach out to anyone within leadership and communicate your initiative. And I'll be honest with you, I often see it very heavily supported. It's very rarely shut down. It's very welcomed because we are looking always at, efficiencies. So it's always very welcome.
I think it's a great call out to just claim 4 hours in the month, right? Who cannot claim 4 hours in the month? If you would pencil in and say, this is just a non-negotiable, you have support from your manager and leaders, because in these 4 hours, no pressure, but I'm going to do magical payroll data thing because I want to do storytelling and move away from it. And if you would pencil it in, I really like the idea. It's clear to everyone, okay, these 4 hours, they're not doing payroll processing, they're not doing case management, they're not doing Excel spreadsheets, they're doing something amazing with a label like, being a global payroll data wizard, or whatever. Right.
Yeah. And what should follow this then should also be the recognition. So there should be appropriate incentives, or and incentives doesn't have to be monetary, but for instance, visibility for the employee to showcase that in, say, a town hall, or to have it more publicized. When it's recognized, more people will be drawn to it. There's going to be more volunteers. So I think it's just creating that opportunity and acknowledging as leadership that there's value in it through, if you will, approving it.
I think listening to both of you, I think there's a timing dimension, just setting aside the time within your undoubtedly very busy schedule. There's obviously also just building the skill set, right? You got to work on that. And I mean, off the top of my head, I would think there's probably a whole number of different avenues you can pursue in order to build more, skills in communication, whether that's, participating in more formal training, training regimes, that might be accessible through the corporate training network, or just going out and, there's so many great podcasts, not just about payroll, but also about, communication and how to put together great presentations and so on. So it's lots of tools, or, another thing I was thinking of is why not partner with someone that is a communication expert and, try to find allies in your marketing and communications team and say, hey, I want to bounce something off of you. I'm working on this presentation or on this pitch. I'd like to hear what, you have to say and how you would maybe help me package this up differently.
Maybe lending a hand to the listeners and the network. Sylwia, I just throw you out there too. We'll be happy to help and support you as well. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn and Marc. If you really want the great storyteller, reach out to Marc too to get some feedback. We will be more than happy to help.
Absolutely. So, which maybe brings us then to kind of wrapping up today's session. We're already doing kind of shout outs and recommending some actions. Sylwia, I think from my perspective, this was extremely informative and insightful, and I think sheds a light on the payroll function from a perspective that on a day-to-day basis, probably many of us don't really, find the time to step back and think about, how should I position myself? How should I articulate our story? So I really enjoyed this. Any last recommendations, shout outs before we wrap up that you would want to leave people with?
So I would always say that patience is key. And I think having high expectations is sometimes difficult. Sometimes you have to move slowly with the organization because you truly have to socialize, and to change corporate culture takes time. So we are a piece in a larger puzzle, and we can try to move things along, and we should never stop. But I think we should also acknowledge that results are through persistency, consistent approach. And we really, really need to start slowly to be able to have something that is stable, so that's something that is consistent. And I think never stop yourself from involving your team or yourself in larger initiatives. The contribution, the value is significantly higher. And so just, I think, reach far, but kind of control what is controllable.
Great advice for just about anything. I like that.
Right. Go ahead, Marc.
Well, for me, that's it. I don't know, Max, if you had anything else from your side you wanted to add or leave us with.
Well, I think to Sylwia's point, I think I've said at an event 8 years ago or something, payroll is an evolution and not a revolution. So I think that's something we all need to be mindful of, especially our stakeholders. And something that I have a poster, I actually have my poster here. And I'm going to see if you can see it. Of course, the listeners can't see it. It has weight on it. I've learned this from a very, very valuable VP that I've worked with before. And it stands for why am I talking? Because I tend to talk too much. So whenever you engage to those stakeholders that I met before, apply the WAIT acronym, because you'll be able to listen much more if you understand the WAIT principle. That's probably what I would want to say. And it's a note to myself as well, by the way, Marc. But no, Sylwia, this has been very insightful. I love what you're doing for the global payroll community, both online and offline. You're a gem that we really appreciate. And on behalf of the global payroll professionals, thank you for everything you do for us, Sylwia.
Thanks.
Absolutely. So to that point of listening, that's it for our listeners and viewers for today's Plug and Pay episode. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. Sylwia, thank you again for coming on and sharing your experience and insights with us. The episodes of Plug and Pay are being released monthly on our YouTube channel, as well as in audio format on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And I suppose that's it for today's session. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.